a software company manages and interacts with hundreds of APIs. These APIs require testing, performance analysis, authorization management, and release management. In a word, APIs require collaboration. Postman is a system for API collaboration. It allows users to test APIs with collections of requests and monitor the API responses and visualize the query results. Users of Postman can collaborate with their team through team workspaces, sharing collections, environments, history, and more. Abhinav Asthana is the founder of Postman, and he joins the show to talk about API collaboration. Postman was started as a side project, as a hobby project. It's grown into a large and successful business far beyond the original product of API testing. If you would like to advertise on Software Engineering Daily, you can send me an email, jeff@softwareengineeringdaily.com. You can reach more than 30,000 engineers every day, and we'd love to have you as a sponsor. And if you are a listener who wants to become a paid subscriber to the show, you can go to softwaredaily.com and click subscribe. On Software Daily, you can also find information about different topics. You can find episodes that relate to one another, and we'd love to have you as a subscriber. So thanks for listening. When I'm building a new product, G2I is the company that I call on to help me find a developer who can build the first version of my product. G2I is a hiring platform run by engineers that matches you with React, React Native, GraphQL, and mobile engineers who you can trust. Whether you are a new company building your first product, like me, or an established company that wants additional engineering help, G2I has the talent that you need to accomplish your goals. Go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/G2I to learn more about what G2I has to offer. We've also done several shows with the people who run G2I, Gabe Greenberg and the rest of his team. These are engineers who know about the React ecosystem, about the mobile ecosystem, about GraphQL, React Native. They know their stuff and they run a great organization. In my personal experience, G2I has linked me up with experienced engineers that can fit my budget, and the G2I staff are friendly and easy to work with. They know how product development works. They can help you find the perfect engineer for your stack. And you can go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/G2I to learn more about G2I. Thank you to G2I for being a great supporter of Software Engineering Daily, both as listeners and also as people who have contributed code that have helped me out in my projects. So if you want to get some additional help for your engineering projects, go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/G2I. Abhinav Asthana, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. Excited to be here.
You work on Postman, which is a platform for API collaboration. What is API collaboration?
So Postman started off as an API REST client. Today, we service the whole spectrum of development, testing, operations, and monitoring for APIs. And what we kind of learned was that all of these things require close collaboration between different teams when they're using all these tools that are there on the Postman platform. So what effectively Postman's collaboration platform lets all these teams do is come together on a single platform, work together, share, and get feedback on things quickly and effectively, and just help you build high quality APIs faster.
I remember using Postman in college. You started with that original just API client use case. And at what point did it become something that was bigger that actually resembled a business?
That's a good question. So Postman for me was kind of like the side project for a while, and I built it to solve my own problems working on APIs. And what I learned was that the problems I had was basically like the entire developer community shared, and those were the things that people were dealing with. So we actually had the first version on the Chrome Web Store back in 2012. It got featured on the new version of the Chrome Web Store in 2013. We had about 500,000 users back then. And there was just so much incoming feedback and usage on the product and so much more that people wanted us to do that we decided to start a company. And at that time, we were fortunate to get our investors to write a check for us. That was where we kind of started thinking that this is a very big company that we're going to make.
Can you describe the usage of Postman today in more detail? What does the average developer use it for?
So there are a bunch of use cases. The first one that typically most developers would start with is what I call this debugging loop for APIs. So you are a developer, you're writing some code, you want to make sure that the API works as expected, and you would fire that API call in Postman, ensure it's working. And if it's not working, you go and fix something and then go back to using Postman again. So that's a very core use case that sticks to developers on their day-to-day workflow. Beyond that, what developers then start doing with Postman is documenting these API calls, creating richer documentation to be shared with others, writing test suites so they make sure that they don't have to manually look for bugs anymore. They can write automated test suites in Postman. And carrying on from there, they can integrate Postman into their continuous integration workflows and their build pipelines. Eventually, all the way to when they ship an API to production, they can use our monitoring service to make sure that those APIs are working as intended. So for a developer, we take them through this whole cycle of thinking about an API, testing their first API call, all the way to using it on a regular basis to make sure all those APIs are working.
And so if I'm doing API testing, what are the different aspects that need to be tested? I mean, there's so much that goes into an API. You've got performance and consistency, and you want to test for the right inputs. Tell me about the workflow for doing API testing.
So some of the first things that people like to do is make sure that the API data model is correct. Like, am I sending the right parameters or am I getting the right response? So the way we look at this whole process is kind of like defining the right boundary for your software. So you're writing all of this code, and the API is effectively like a boundary through which data is coming in and out. And where developers start with is speccing out that, what would happen if I send a malformed parameter? What if I have a use case for which, I need to get a certain response? Is that response correct? So you kind of start with the very basics there. You want to look for what are the right status codes for the API. So sometimes developers would start, if they're building a REST API, just with the default that their framework gives them. But you want to make sure that, let's say, if you don't find the right response on your server, you want to return a 404. Or if something was not working, you kind of return something in the 3xx category. So there's kind of like this evolutionary loop for your API that kind of happens. And with APIs, generally, you're not testing just one API endpoint. You're testing sometimes your API in conjunction with other APIs. So you want to see like the flow of those APIs, is that working or not? Or you might want to run a regression test to make sure if you make a change in one API, then is that change not breaking all these other endpoints that you have inside your API? From that point onwards, once you ensure that your API is working as per defined behavior, you can go towards checking for security parameters. So making sure that if you, let's say, inject something or you try to kind of break the API into spitting out some data that you didn't intend to, you would want to check whether the API is secure. That way, Postman also returns request call data. So how fast is your API at a per API call level? Is it taking too long? Where is exactly the flaws at in terms of your infrastructure when you're looking at it from a performance perspective? All of these things kind of go in there. Some of the more complicated parts are really testing for all the different ways in which an API can go wrong, and you can embed those test cases in Postman. So, the testing landscape, like as we have studied, is like there are lots of different terms associated with it, like integration testing, contract testing, functional testing. And I'm kind of giving like a high level summary of kind of all of those, but you can pick one of these as your preferred approaches towards testing and then kind of go for that.
So if I'm a developer and I'm messing around with APIs, I could use curl, I could use wget. Why would I use a platform for doing API testing?
So that's what, where like I'd say the world state was when I started building Postman. And I was, one of those developers who would have to rely on curl. So one basic problem that you end up with is as your APIs get more complicated, working on a command line with curl or wget becomes very hard. And something as simple as sending a simple parameter, if you make a change in one character, your API will not return the right response. So all of those things kind of become very hard. It's okay sometimes for simple APIs if you're doing just a basic get call to fetch some data, that's fine. But as you go towards building more complicated API requests with form data parameters, files, and you also have large JSON responses to process, you end up typically writing a homegrown API client yourself. So when I actually was building Postman, I used to go to developers and ask them like, hey, how do you solve this problem? And everybody would have their own API client that they built on the side to help them with API projects. So what we learned was that we could just solve all of these problems in one go. We help you construct those requests better. You see the responses in a pretty way. You don't see them as a single line JSON text. And once you see them in a legible way, you can just do that faster, the debugging process and the testing process faster. Now, the interesting part about APIs is that, and the way we define it is that an API is an intent to collaborate with somebody else. If you're writing code, it's something that you might use it for yourself. But if you're building an API, somebody else has to use it. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty sad API. Like I built an API just for myself. Right? Sometimes those relationships extend to backend and front end developers. It extends between backend and backend developers when you look at microservices architectures within a company. It extends to development teams across different business units, different development teams working across company boundaries like partners. Or if you look at public APIs, where you individual developer relying on public APIs from the likes of like Stripe or AWS or Google. So when we kind of looked at this problem of API testing, we saw that it's not just about making sure whether the API is working, it's whether these people and these teams who are working with each other through this connecting pipe of APIs, are they working better or not? Okay. And what we started building towards was helping developers and teams manage the complexity that comes with it. So the next step that happens is, okay, you tested that the API is working, but what if an API changes because somebody else, changed it? Now they might not know which parameter that you were relying on or what was the behavior that you relied on. And there's an interesting law called the Hiram's law here that all observable behaviors of a system will be relied on by consumers of an API. So even API producers typically don't know how exactly consumers are using. So this becomes a collaborative problem, right? Like somebody changes an API, somebody else relies on it, somebody builds other APIs on top of it. So the reason you use a collaboration platform is to solve like this meta and a much more major problem of making sure that you're working fast enough. You can do that. You can, send curl calls over email or Slack. But as the problem scales up across, hundreds of thousands of APIs, you would need a collaborative system to help you do that.
You've built a variety of other tools around this problem because, API collaboration wasn't even a space when you started Postman. You basically identified that this is actually a really big opportunity. So there's one product you built called a Postman Workspace. Can you explain what a workspace is?
Yeah, absolutely. So workspace is an interesting concept as we developed it as Postman evolved. So one of the things we saw was to solve this collaboration problem, people are essentially sharing files all over the place. Even Postman collection files, they would download it and share it with others, or they would sometimes put it inside a repository and other people would take it from the repository. So there was a lot of like this back and forth that was happening through tooling. So what we envisioned was a shared environment in which different people can come in, they see the same API as everybody else. And Postman workspaces are a real-time collaborative construct. So if let's say you and I are working together on Postman and you change something, then I'm going to get that update with an automatic diff of what was there. So we can, if you imagine, what Google Docs is to documents, a Postman workspace is the same thing for your APIs. And you can invite as many people as you can. You can do your testing, you can do your monitoring, you can do your debugging and documentation, all of that together. So it just cuts down a lot on the amount of time it just takes to, share things along. So that's what Postman workspaces help you do.
Workflow, by the way. So like, let's say we got a company with 2 developers in it, and I'm developing a service that's downstream of your service. You've got the service A, and your service A is often calling service B, which I maintain. So we've got this interaction pattern between each other. Whenever I deploy a new version of my API, you need to be able to hit that API still. So what is the workflow like?
That's a good question. So we are a little bit non-opinionated about which workflow you would like to adopt because there are certain social constructs, between people. But in this case, one thing that we would recommend is, before I go there. So the notion of a workspace in Postman is that they are contexts. They are not containers. And the difference is that you can have a workspace for yourself and somebody else can have a workspace for themselves. And the same thing can be shared between the two. Because I'm seeing something in one context, and maybe you're seeing something in the development context, and I'm seeing something in the consumption context. So what here we would do is you would create a Postman collection, and we can probably talk about Postman's design tools if it comes to, but now we are flexible with respect to what we support, an open API file or whatever. So I would, let's say, create a collection or some documentation. I would share it in your workspace. And if I make changes to my API, update something, you will get the same change. An alternative is we can create a shared workspace and I can invite those developers and they can build something together. So if I change something, I will update that collection. That collection is going to be synced automatically to somebody else's Postman instance. And now they get an updated version of the API. So there are 2 models available. And as the development team kind of scales up and they have different contexts of going from development, staging, production, you have all that flexibility there.
Today's sponsor is Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform for cloud-scale infrastructure and applications. Datadog integrates with more than 400 technologies, so you can track every layer of your complex microservices architecture all in one place. Distributed tracing and APM provide end-to-end visibility into requests wherever they go, across hosts, containers, and service boundaries. With rich dashboards, algorithmic alerts, and collaboration tools, Datadog provides your team with the tools that they need to quickly troubleshoot and optimize modern applications. You can see for yourself and start a 14-day free trial, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Just go to softwareengineeringdaily.com/Datadog and learn more, get that free cozy t-shirt, and start your 14-day trial of Datadog. Thank you to Datadog for being a sponsor of the show. Can you tell me more about how companies actually use Postman? Because I know how I've used it as just a rogue random developer in college, but I'd like to know more about how actual enterprises use it.
So Postman is being used at large enterprises across hundreds of developers working together for all the cases from design to production. So typically for larger organizations, they are structured into individual teams. Those teams will be part of the same Postman account. These teams will have the workspaces that they work in, along with other teams having their respective workspaces. Once the entire organization is on Postman, what they end up doing is kind of having a system that becomes like a source of truth for their APIs in Postman. Okay, so everybody in those teams keeps that source of truth up to date, and then they share things across workspaces for all the aspects of your API cycle. So this would be designing your APIs through open API files, GraphQL files, or YAML files. Of course, the debugging use case is something that's a day-to-day part of every developer, just like yours. So they use it for API consumption and API debugging, building and sharing documentation for those APIs. A key part is integration testing and test automation. So a lot of those teams have developers working alongside ops, alongside QA, and the QA engineering team would build test automation suites in Postman using the APIs that the development team has published for them. And then they would be integrated as part of the CI pipeline that the ops team is running. And in this construct, the same things that you were using to share an API act as quality gates in your pipeline. And then the ops team takes those things, builds the pipeline. And once the APIs go to production, they use the monitoring service to make sure, they are able to hit those APIs, or they also use it for just checking, once in a while that things in production are working well. So that's the production workflow. We also see use cases across non-developers who are involved in what we call the business of APIs. So this involves, let's say, driving adoption of public APIs through our documentation tools that you can publish, building recipes or onboarding journeys for your API buyers in a way. So all those things happen for large enterprises within a Postman account.
Tell me about the stack of technologies around Postman. So I'm imagining myself issuing an API request in Postman, and I'm wondering what's going on your stack.
So Postman uses Node.js for almost all of the client and the backend services that we have. Postman is written in JavaScript and Node.js. Today we publish